Most people are surprised to learn that they maintain, and often actually create, the problems that they face. Often people will work hard to resist this idea, and that can be difficult to overcome, but it's worth the effort. Until people understand their own role in maintaining their difficulties, they can't really take responsibility for solving them. After all, if you don't think you're a part of the problem, you won't think that you need to change your behaviour to fix it. This is why it's often useful to chart a person's reactions to their difficulties with them, and at each stage ask the person what they could have done differently and what might have changed for them if they had. The point here isn't to blame the person or accuse them of creating their own problems. It's simply to get them to tell us how they might react differently in the future and begin to find a way out of their problems instead of making them worse. So we ask what might be different instead of trying to tell someone what we think. It's always much more effective if the client or service user tells us the answer rather than the other way around. This can form the basis of a support plan or another strategy that the person can use to change their situation for the better. If the service user is unwilling to discuss their behaviour with you, then there are some alternatives. One of these involves the ABC chart: antecedent, behaviour and consequence. Make a detailed note without any interpretation or opinion about what happened before the behaviour began, the antecedent, what the behaviour was, behaviour, and what happened immediately after, the consequence. By charting several incidents in this way, it's possible to see a pattern building up. If the behaviour generally happens in response to a certain situation, then that's probably the stimulus that you need to work on. If the behaviour always results in a certain response from others, then you might need to change the way you react. Remember, if you do the same things, you will get the same results. Everybody needs to feel that they belong, that they have value, and that other people are interested in them. Helping the client to feel this way is the aim of engagement. The process is what we call validation. And validation is made up of relatively few simple principles. These are respecting the individual and their rights, accepting their feelings, respecting their opinions, accepting that they are our equals, whatever social, psychological or physical problems they may be experiencing, working collaboratively, and give and take. People who don't feel validated by those around them tend to react in a number of ways, few of which are particularly helpful for effective communication. Chronic invalidation has been identified as a major source of prolonged trauma and can lead to a range of social, psychological and relationship problems. The concept of validation is extremely important when dealing with disagreement. Make a point of catching them doing it right as often as you can. This validates the client, demonstrates that you're interested in them, that you care enough to notice, that you respect their efforts, a major form of reward, and perhaps most importantly, it's a very powerful method of developing rapport. Like it or not, you live and work in a paternalistic, fatherly, controlling culture. Whatever the ethic of your organisation, whatever your own personal stance may be, the system here in Britain is paternalistic. In my own professional world of mental health care, this is particularly so, but paternalism is not exclusive to psychiatry. For example, you or someone you work with will have responsibility for risk assessment and for deciding what is and is not an acceptable risk on behalf of your clients. However you dress it up, the fact remains that some people make decisions for others, and those decisions are not always welcomed by the client. It's not usually a good idea to set yourself up as an opponent of paternalism whose only objective is to advocate on behalf of the client. This can be a pleasant stance to take, and it works well some of the time. However, if, for example, you learn that your client is about to put another person at risk, you have a responsibility under various forms of legislation to warn that individuals and possibly involve other services like the police, safeguarding or mental health services. This is paternalism at work. It's much better to acknowledge that there are limits to your ability to side with the client. You have a job to do and you have laws to obey. The vast majority of clients already know this anyway, although they may, from time to time, try to get you to act differently. Don't go there. Paternalism is part of the job. The moment you try to gain a client's confidence by entering into any conspiratorial situation or by keeping secrets which really you should speak about, you lose respect from the client and you'll quickly tie yourself up in knots. Having said that, some aspects of paternalism can be challenged and indeed ought to be. For example, if your client has an opinion which differs from the established view, perhaps they've been diagnosed as psychotic or delusional, you will do your interactions with that person no favours by dismissing their opinions. That doesn't mean that you have to pretend to agree with them. Simply acknowledge that you have different opinions and that each opinion is valid. That's the important bit. It promotes an air of mutual respect rather than paternalistic invalidation. It also forms an excellent basis for genuine discussion around the issue in question. Bear in mind that discussion doesn't mean contradiction. It's far better and infinitely more effective to ask questions rather than state your own opinions. Different people have different motivating factors. For example, some people move away from things they don't like, whereas others are more likely to move toward things that they do like. Offering an away from person a reward is not likely to be as effective as reminding them of the consequences if they don't do what's required. Understanding how a service user responds to different factors is extremely helpful when trying to motivate them, or even when attempting to get them to understand what we're saying to them. Always bear in mind Freud's pleasure principle. People move toward what gives them pleasure and away from things that cause them pain. However, as I regularly point out, different people define pain and pleasure differently. The point is that people tend to do what works for them and not to repeat the things that don't work. Also bear in mind that some people are interested in short-term pleasure at the cost of long-term pain, which is why they often do things that appear self-destructive, but which actually are positive at the time. They make them happy for a short time, or allow them to forget their larger problems. When we try to find a way to get someone to change their behaviours, it's not enough simply to attempt to make them stop. Rather, we must encourage a different behaviour instead, and that behaviour must give them a payoff. It must be pleasurable in either the long or short term, preferably both, but that's not always possible. Even punishment can be a positive payoff, as we shall see later in this series. That's why regimes that are designed purely to prevent undesired behaviours tend to be unsuccessful. The punishment itself becomes the reward that maintains the problem and even makes it worse. I'm Stuart Sorensen, and this is Mind the Care training. If you found this video useful or helpful in any way, please feel free to share it around and click the like button. Oh yes, and while you're at it, if you click on the little character icon that's on your screen right now, you can subscribe to the channel and you won't miss any other videos. Thank you for watching.